Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy, I'm the host of the show, and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I started laughing because I realized that as soon as I finished the intro, I would have to talk for, 30 seconds about what's on my mind. And all that's on my mind is our continuing descent into dystopia, which is not a fun way to start out a podcast, so I will instead say I'm very excited. I just found out that Adam Curtis has a new documentary out, only in Britain right now, and I'm trying to figure out how to watch it. But I love Adam Curtis. And you know who else I love? Today's guest, Chip Zdarsky. If you don't know who Chip is, why don't I read you his bio right now? Originally from Barrie, Ontario, comics creator Chip Zdarsky worked for almost 14 years at the National Post newspaper as a columnist and illustrator. In 2013, he made the jump to comics, co-creating the Eisner Award-winning comic Sex Criminals with Matt Fraction, who himself is wonderful. Since then, he's written Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, Daredevil, currently, which is amazing, Howard the Duck, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and many other comics for Marvel, Image, and Archie. And his most current creator-owned work is the incredible book Stillwater, which is published by Image. It is one of my favorite books right now. It was outright my favorite book of last year. It's great. Check it out. This was wonderful, by the way. Right off the bat, Chip and I got along. I mean, I knew he had a sense of humor from his work. Well, that may not be true. I know many writers out here who are very funny writers, but very dour people. So, or seemingly, maybe not dour, but just seemingly do not have a sense of humor in person. So, but this was just a delightful hour. We really got into it. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. I've been doing it for 11 years. If you want to check out other episodes, I like to spend a little bit of time here in the intro recommending some things for you. Now, Chip is a comics creator. What about other comics creators that I've had on the show? I've talked to Rob Guillory, Cy Spurrier, Michael Kupperman, Chris Claremont, Cecil Castellucci, Sina Grace, Jackson Public, Paul Hornschmeyer, Kate Beaton. There's a lot of great ones in there. They all should be there at Spotify or beginnings.libsyn.com or other places. I think most podcatchers just have the last 100. So check out those episodes. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe to the show on Amazon, on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, plenty of other places. Pretty much, I guess, wherever you get your podcast from. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. And whoo boy, I gotta tell you, some great episodes coming up. Next week, Ron Moore, who is the creator of the new Battlestar Galactica, wrote for Star Trek The Next Generation, Outlander. He helped create For All Mankind, which is on Apple TV. He helped create that. That was really, really good. I've also got, from the world of music, Tobin Sprout from Guided by Voices, Bob Nastanovich from Pavement, Jamie Stewart from Shoo Shoo. That was really great. The guys from Chavez. That's coming up. So stay tuned for all of that. But for now, let's talk to Chip.
I'm against the pandemic. That's how I feel about it.
Coming out with some hot takes immediately on the show. I don't know if you want. Do you want to be saying that in recorded media?
Oh, we didn't start recording, right?
Well, it's there. I mean, I don't have to look. I can start.
Right.
The actual episode can start whenever. So I can leave that. If you're feeling uncomfortable about coming out against the pandemic, I can 100% cut that out, but it's up to you.
No, I'm a man of my word. I stand behind it.
Oh, so you have integrity. Okay, that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Wait, where did you move to?
I'm in Victoria, British Columbia. We're just here for the winter. My wife's parents are here, and there's no snow in the winter, so seemed like a good idea. How about you? Where are you at?
Los Angeles.
Okay.
It's because I was
So
trying to figure out in my head. I'm like, did you move here for TV or movie stuff? Did you move to Portland to be with other comics people, or did you stay in Canada?
no, to be perfectly honest, I'm staying away from America as long as I can.
Why?
I
It's
know.
such a broken empire.
Yeah, it's something else.
I mean, we don't have to talk about politics. That's pretty much every other place. Um,
Well, you know what? I was having a difficult time getting into America over the past couple of years. Border patrol has gotten a lot more intense, and I get taken to the back room every single time for an hour or two at the airport. And yeah, I was kind of done with it at that point, and the pandemic and everything else kind of made it even more so.
wait, just for being Canadian, or for
For
other like your work in the media?
for going to comic conventions, because they were like, "Oh, you're making money." I'm like, "Oh, I'm not making money," but they still let me through.
Uh-huh.
But ever since then, I've got like a black mark on my passport. So when I go to the States for any reason, I get, you know, the grilling, the pretty intense grilling. I got to add an hour to my travel itinerary just to deal with it.
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
You're like, do you want to come with me to a comics convention to see how little money I make from it?
yeah, if at all. Oh God,
Wait, do you actually go by Chip, or is that just your pen name?
it's my pen name, but the only people that call me Steve are my wife and my parents, basically. Everyone else just calls me Chip at this point.
Do you find it weird navigating that alias, the boundary between it, where like at home you are Steve, and in the rest of the world you are Chip?
No, no, not at all. It's only weird when I'm at a comic convention. Like a few years ago, I went to San Diego Comic Con and I was able to bring a plus one. So I brought my brother, who's like a nerd. And at one point, I was doing some sketching for a lineup, and my brother was like 10 feet away talking to somebody. He turned to get my attention. He kept saying, Steve, Steve. And my head just didn't move. And then he goes, Chip. And I'm like, what? Like, it's so automatic, that switch, that I don't even, doesn't even register anymore.
Did you Did you create an alias so you could be more free to write what you wanted to write or draw what you wanted to draw?
Kind of. The alias came about in college. I did a comic strip in college called Prison Funnies, which was a dark college humor strip. But I was also doing illustrations for a lot of the newspapers in Canada at that point, like the national papers. And I just didn't want any backlash from my editors at the newspapers about the strip. So I just came up with an alias just to keep it separate, and it just kind of kept going. It was one of those things where it just stuck. Anytime I did something fictional, I did it as Chip because originally it was kind of created as a character. Like I interviewed myself for my school newspaper, like Steve Murray interviews Chip Zdarsky, and Chip Zdarsky was like this sad sack who like was hung up on a girl, lived in his parents' basement, painting figurines. Like, and when I first started doing comic conventions, I played that up. Like, I had like an outfit, fake glasses, cowboy hat. Like, I went all in. Uh, and yeah, the next thing I knew, all the Chip Zdarsky stuff started to take over. Um, because as Steve Murray, I was doing a lot of newspaper work, and I was kind of popular in Toronto, Canada region for that. And the Chip was the side stuff. Now Chip is like the main hustle, and I don't do anything as Steve anymore except file my taxes.
Is there any truth to the character you created? I think about it in terms of like stand-ups I know who have more of a persona. Like
Hmm.
they're not, some like my wife is a stand-up and she is pretty much herself on like with more energy on stage. But
Yeah.
other people I know, like it's a complete persona that they've draped over themselves.
Well, it was a weird time in my life because it was like 2002, 2003, and I just got divorced. And so part of it was like creating this kind of weird zany character who just like got drunk a lot and like got up to no good. It was a bit of a dog, and like it was kind of under the illusion of this character. Uh, since then I've had a therapist who just loves the fact that I came up with an entirely different persona post divorce, with including name and fictional history. Um, so yeah, I mean, now I think who I am now is kind of a merging of those two things. Like the stuff I did as Steve was a lot more kind of reserved, and the stuff I did as Chip was kind of wild, and the reality is kind of in between, right? So I think now I'm just like I'm who I am, and I just happen to use both names.
Yeah. No, because I do think it's interesting. I know that myself. I felt like I was a split person. I don't mean like split personality, like a movie
Yeah,
or something like that. But I just felt like there was like a genuine side of me. Like I was when I went into like intellectual activities when I was in grad school, and when I was doing stuff there, I was one kind of person, and then when I was
yeah,
doing comedy, I was a completely other kind of person. And it was really there was like almost a brick wall between those two people, and I felt I found it very difficult to move fluidly between those two things. And it's only
okay,
like as an adult, like an actual adult, that
yeah,
I've been able to kind of like become a unified person in some
yeah,
way.
yeah. I totally get that. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I was a shy kid. I was like the tiniest kid in my class, and I drew basically so I could draw friends for myself. But in college, when you kind of meet people you you identify with, that kind of loosened me up and got me doing more kind of humor stuff and kind of just elevating kind of the class clown stuff into, I don't know, like a full on comedian, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when it started to like emerge as like the secondary persona, and then as an adult again, like those two things kind of merged.
It's so insane to me sometimes. Like, I've been doing this show for 11 years almost.
Yeah.
And the there are some very basic things that kind of just like put us on certain paths, or just not. I don't mean put us on certain paths, but I guess point us in a direction. Like wind us up, like one of those
Hmm.
little toys with the, and then you just put us off in a certain thing, and it kind of goes off. It doesn't go off in a straight line, but it goes off in like an area,
Yeah.
and like just body size. It's just so weird to me how like I'm short, and I was like very short when I was younger. That just like immediately excluded me. I enjoyed playing sports, but that was never going to be a thing I did.
Yeah.
And it just immediately just like pushed me off in a different direction without me making any actual decisions for myself. It was just like,
Yeah.
well, this is your body size. Deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's also kind of why I gravitated towards comics as a hobby, as a reader. Like, it's often talked about how most of the comics when I was growing up, the superhero ones especially, were power fantasies for boys. And when I was a kid, I just felt like I had no power. Like, bullied at school and stuff, and like, my little brother could beat me up in a fight. Like it was bad. So of course, you want to identify with like these muscle bound superheroes, or like, Peter Parker with all his troubles, but secretly he's actually, amazingly powerful. Um, yeah, there's definitely something to that.
Yeah. Yeah. The freedom. I'm trying to think about like what originally appealed to me about. I mean, I'm a big X-Men guy.
Mm,
Ever since I was in like I don't know 11, 12, somewhere. I forget where I first started reading them, but like I think there's something about like that other, for me at least, it was the otherness
hmm
on top of the power. I don't even think it was the power. Like I've written some stuff just for myself, like stories where like no one even fights anyone. They just
Yeah,
sit around and have dramatic conversations about like what existential issues and things like that.
yeah,
But I think it was the otherness to me, and I think that like goes through like also Peter Parker or somewhere else, or other people that kind of like you're always alienated, even though you have all this power.
yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, X Men hit me pretty hard as a kid too, especially as a teenager. Um, it's almost like the Spider-Man stuff was like for when I was a kid, and then X-Men was when I was a teenager. Um, Mostly because I also erotically imprinted on almost all the X-Men, so that helped. I was just talking about this the other day with a friend. We're talking about the artist Mark Silvestri,
Yeah.
who drew X-Men, and I was just like, oh, all my sexuality stems from Mark Silvestri drawings, like men and women. Like there's like a scene with like Madeline Pryor and Alex Summers when they were like in Inferno, and
Yeah.
like they wore all like the super sexy torn clothing, and like, geez, like Alex Summers is just like a homoerotic dream man. Like it's just unbelievable what they were getting away with drawing.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
and
I mean,
I loved it. I wanted to be him. I wanted to be with him, like all of it.
I can literally picture that in I know
Mhm,
exactly what you're talking about from Inferno too. That's
mhm.
how like well defined it is in my brain.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also like it was weird. I was like I'm a little younger than you, but like there was like a bunch of like cheesecake stuff. This was like right when like Jim Lee took over.
Hmm.
So like X-Men 1. There was like all this like weird like drawing them in swimsuits, drawing like Psylocke and Rogue in swimsuits.
There was a whole swimsuit issue. I think they did a couple of them. Like they were like magazine format. They did some other things too. They did like a Time magazine kind of knockoff,
Yes, I
like
remember
as
that.
if it took place in the Marvel universe. But the swimsuit issues were huge. And to be honest, like I talked to editors a lot at Marvel about the idea of bringing it back. Like there's so many great pinup artists. I think it started just because like I'm a huge fan of Kevin Wada. I don't know if you know that artist.
I know the name. I can't picture their style.
He just does beautiful kind of watercolor with digital touch ups, um, fashion hunks, like just really modern, beautiful pinup fashion illustrations of superheroes and various comic characters, and they're so well done. Like I think, not to knock the artist during the '90s, but I think the level of that kind of art is so high right now that I think if they did a swimsuit issue, it would just like would be gorgeous, just gorgeous.
Were you in touch? Like, were you okay with your sexuality? Because like, growing up in Pennsylvania, we just like we didn't like my parents had a talk with me in fifth grade,
Yeah.
and then that was that. You didn't talk about it. You didn't even talk about it with your friends, really.
Oh man, I had too many conversations with my parents. I think like well, I mean, it started when I was like 6 because I was stealing my dad's adult magazines and becoming acquainted with the female form, um, and also just kind of figuring it out myself. And at one point, I was 6 years old. I was charging neighborhood girls money to for a variety of services. It was like 5 cents they could look at my penis, like 25 cents they could touch it. If they had 50 cents, I would lie down naked with them in a bed. Like I was like a 6-year-old sex worker. It was very weird. And I think my parents just kind of they found out about that, found out about like the magazines disappearing, and had their first sex talk with me when I was 6, which I think included like anatomy books and like The Joy of Sex, which is a really
Uh,
weird book for a
I
kid
remember.
to see. And so they did a lot of checking in with me as I was growing up. Um, you know, uh, this is in the '80s, and we had gay relatives, so I was introduced to the idea of gay lesbian culture at a young age as well. Introduced to like so many kind of aspects of sexuality growing up that made me pretty comfortable, like even through high school, with what I liked and what I didn't like. And that kind of continued on to now. Like I'm always discovering things about myself, and I'm never like none of it feels shameful. And that's all down to my parents, like being kind of ahead of the curve, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. It's not like my parents were like they never shamed me about anything, but just like just didn't talk about it. Like
Yeah.
it was like we had one talk. I asked them all the questions I could think of, and then anytime after that, it just felt like it was a barrier we didn't want to cross with each other.
I had a thing in college because I went to art school, and when you're in art school, you discover even more things about yourself. And I came home for like Thanksgiving or something like that, and um, uh, I was really into gold lame at the time, like a gold lame shirt. And I remember being in my living room, and my dad was there, and I kind of sat down at the piano. I was kind of plunking away at a bit of a tune, and Dad was like, "No, keep going, keep going." I'm like, "Oh, all right." And so I started playing. I I swear to God, I think it was Hello Dolly because I had a book of show tunes. I was like playing Hello Dolly, and and I'm like, "Wow, Dad's watching me play." Like he never, hangs around for that. And after I was done, he called me over to the table. He's like, "Yeah, I want to talk to you about something. Your mother and I, we've been talking, and we just want you to know that it's okay if you're gay. You know that, right?" And I'm like, "But I'm not." And he's like, "But it's okay if you are." And I'm like, "But I'm not." He's like, "Well, we notice you don't bring girls home or anything like that. You love kids in the hall." Like they were like, they had their checklist, right? I'm sure the comic books probably factored into it too. So it ended up being just like this weird afternoon with my dad where I just kept trying to tell him that I'm not gay, but like they'd already convinced themselves that I was, so they wanted to really follow through with this good parent discussion. Yeah, I think that was the last talk about sexuality with my parents.
He likes chicken, lady. We don't get it.
Yeah, yeah. But again, they were so supportive. Like they got me for my birthday when I was like 16. They got me tickets to see Kids in the Hall, like a taping of the show while it was still on the air. That was massive. Like we drove to Toronto from out of town and made it a whole day, and I'm sure they didn't understand any of it. And they're just like, "All right, our kid enjoys gay culture." They're very
It-
sweet.
so you do have a pretty open relationship with them, though.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes too open. Like I think the day after I lost my virginity, I just burst into my mom's room and just had to tell her, like, it's just like, why? Uh, yeah, I think there were several points that it was like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have instilled this frank openness too much with our son. But I mean, it's come in handy since I ended up working on a book called Sex Criminals. Like my
Right.
parents, it was a very different experience. My parents with that book and Matt, the writer's parents with that book. Like, like I think there was a point when Sex Criminals was like Time Magazine's Comic of the Year, so it made some news. And like Matt's dad like took him aside and was like, there's no shame in putting food on the table for your family. If you've got to do this comic to do that, you like he just thought it was like porno. Whereas my parents like hung a poster of sex criminals in their kitchen. Like they're constantly giving out copies to their friends. So yeah.
So Matt's parents didn't read it. They just thought it was, instead of like being an intimate portrayal of like
Yeah.
depression and sexuality, they thought it was just
Just porno. Just porno to make some money. Poor Matt. Yeah,
um
my parents are incredibly cool. Like they, when I was a teenager, they became like motorbike enthusiasts and nudists, and um, I think my little brother was more, shell shocked by their lifestyle than I was. I was just like, yeah, you go, that's great. Um, yeah, so it helped a lot.
I mean, what made them become kind of open like that? Did they come like, are your grandparents open people? Did they
No.
just live through the 60s and that's what did it?
Yeah, I mean, I think living through the '60s helped, and you always want to do better than your parents, and they probably had kind of more repressed childhoods than, well, obviously they did than I did. Um, and they just want to be good parents. Like you're always learning as a parent, like what's changed since you were a kid. Like I'm sure parents now are having those similar discussions, like, oh, okay, maybe we learned about like gay and lesbian culture, but now, we're learning about like non-binary, trans culture. Like there's a
Yeah.
whole other world for them to think about. Um, so yeah, I think it's just a matter of them learning and wanting to make sure that we were okay in the world that we were living in.
Do you think that openness allowed you to, or gave you some more freedom to pursue art and writing as a career?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like we were not by any means well off. So going up to college, um, it was going to be costly for all of us, even though it was like, I think my tuition for art school was like $3,000 a year, which was nothing. Um, my parents had to scrounge to get that money together, and I had to pay for everything else, like
Hmm.
my rent and my food and stuff. And so the decision to go to college uh, into a career that doesn't actually make you any money, um, that was a hard one. I think most parents would maybe push back on it. Um, uh, and want their kid to go into something where there's a bit more of a guaranteed income. Like I went to school for illustration, which I think my parents quite understood. I think they thought it meant animation, but but yeah, yeah. Like I think the one difference between their generation and my generation is they got jobs that became careers,
Hmm.
and that was that.
Yeah.
And they liked aspects of their jobs, they hated aspects of their jobs, but it afforded them to like own a house, car, maybe go on a vacation once a year. So I think they looked at me and my brother and were like, "You guys can probably, do something different and explore what you want to do, and maybe that'll give you a career that maybe you don't make a lot of money, but you're happier doing the work." Um, and yeah, it worked out.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I think about like this, growing up with this openness, I find both your art very expressive and also your writing to be pretty emotionally open. And I wonder if like having this kind of like openness in your childhood, allowed you to develop to be able to develop more as a writer. It took me. I had to go into therapy first before I was really able to add any emotion to the things I was making.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is they probably taught me to observe other people and to be aware of the effect you're having on other people. Um, Once you kind of crack that, then every story becomes your story. Like you can find the emotion um, of a character without having the lived experience of that character. Uh, yeah, a bit more empathy, I think, is what they instilled by being that level of open. Um, I'm assuming. It's hard to actually like reflect and be like, why can I do this job at a certain level. um but I think that's mostly it, just like taking it in, like being the quiet kid meant that I was listening and watching more than I was talking and acting out,
Hmm.
which ultimately probably helped me, even though it didn't help me make friends at the time. It probably helped me become a better person as an adult.
Although it is, I mean, you said, um, I forget exactly what. What for me though, it was I was an observer. I was alienated. I was outside of it, but at the same time, I was also like funny and a class clown.
Hmm.
And so there was this, again, maybe even like a dual personhood in some way,
Yeah.
where like I would like shift, I would, dialectically in between these two kinds of modes.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. I had a bit of that for sure. Like I was never full on class clown, but like when the opportunity presented itself and I could get up the courage to do it, I would. Drawing also helped. Like people liked my drawings, and so there were several periods in my schooling where the drawings got me through. Like I designed the murals for the school in public school, and um, in high school, like I didn't get beat up by the football team because I drew tattoos on them before the game, like that kind of thing. It was a mechanism to have people like me and also to not die.
How many bullies were in your school?
Oh, I went to Bully High, so very unfortunate choice.
Yeah, it's right there in the name.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, like I don't know, when you're the tiny kid, like the jocks will size you up, like uh the the rough and tumble ones will, want to kind of throw you into a locker, and you do what you can to get away from that. And part of it's being funny, and part of it was being able to draw, weirdly enough.
Yeah. But I mean, like, I avoided that fate. I think by I had friends that were like taller than me or stronger than me,
Hmm.
and so it's not like it's not like I was like a ringleader and I would sick them on people. It's not like that. But it's just like
Yeah.
no one want like they're like, it's too much trouble. We're not gonna like bother this guy. It seemed to be. I don't know what their point of view was, but it just seemed like no one seemed to bother me in high school, even though I was into the Tick and Kids in the Hall. I did this English project in AP English. I did a project where I just rewrote Kids in the Hall sketches to be about like terms in grammar and
That's great.
perform them for the class.
Yeah.
And yet, like, I was left alone somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was mostly left alone. Um, I had one friend who was on the football team. He was like kind of the school hunk. I lived vicariously through him, and he was my friend in grade 10 and 11. So grade 9, it was rough. 10 and 11 wasn't that rough. And then by the time grade 12 came around, it's like, all right, you're the older, you're clearly not the smallest kid in high school anymore. And you find your people. And I
Yeah.
just kind of floated between kind of groups of weird outsiders. I never really settled into any one group.
Did you ever? I spent a lot of time like looking for what I call my tribe in some way. Like I do a lot of that where I like bounce around from group to group. Did you ever find that group?
Not really. I mean, I would, whenever I felt like I found it, it was never quite right. And I would always kind of reject it uh, just for reasons of just wanting to be by myself for the most part. I remember there was a kid like in my neighborhood that was like cool and he liked comics and he wanted to hang out. And I'm like, and I just kept rebuffing all the advances. Like he'd come by the house and I'd make up an excuse like, oh, I got to do dishes. Well, I didn't have to do dishes. I just wanted to hang out in my room, just draw and read comics by myself. Like it felt like too much pressure to actually be part of a group. Um, so
Yeah.
like, so towards the end of high school, like I was like kind of friends with like the computer nerds, but I wasn't that good at the computer stuff. So I was kind of on the outside because I was a bit cooler than them, but I wasn't cool enough to hang out with like cool arts people, or like the band people. I found one friend towards the end of high school, a guy named Ben, who was like a total misfit outcast. Um, and he really leaned into it. Like, when the football players would, make kissing noises at him in the hallway and like, do you want a kiss? He would just like go up to me like, yeah, do you want one? And then he'd get the shit kicked out of him. He had like big, long, the crow hair and like a plaid tuxedo. And he was obvious in the ways that I was trying to hide. And one day we were both trying to avoid the same guy, not a bully, but just like a guy who was even like nerdier than us. Super annoying. We were just kind of trying to avoid him, and then we ran into each other like and kind of teamed up to get away from him, and became best friends. Like that was almost instant. Like he was into manga, and I was into superhero comics and Vertigo books, and we would go to the comic shop and read each other's stuff and kind of broaden our horizons. And he's my best friend today. Like we end up going to illustration school together and graduating and making like comics and illustrations and graphic design. And um, it's a friendship of like, God, like 25 years now, just based on wanting to avoid some weird dude in the parking lot.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we have somewhat similar high school experiences. Is I mean, what's Barry like when you're growing up there?
Um, Barrie, Ontario is a small city. So I spent some formative years in a town called Coldwater, which was like 1,000 people, and then Barrie was 40,000 people. So it felt like I moved to the big city, and I was like the weird hick for a long time. Um, but it's like, by the time you're in high school, it kind of feels like Dazed and Confused. Like, it's like, the weekend, it's Friday night or whatever, your friends are just kind of driving around
Mm-hmm.
trying to find out what the other friends are doing, and then you're out in the bush and like maybe someone's getting drunk, you get a call like to go somewhere else. Like we didn't have cell phones either, so it was like a lot of driving, just like knocking on doors and wondering what people were doing.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just like got hit. I'm like, we would hang out in like the Blockbuster parking lot,
Hmm.
and then we would drive to our friend Chris's house, and we would call people from there to see what was going on,
Yeah.
and then we would hang out in the Walmart parking lot, and
Yeah.
then we would go to my house and watch a movie or play Tekken or something,
Yeah.
and it was
Yeah.
just a lot of that.
I only had a couple of years of that really. Like when my cool friend was around, as soon as he wasn't, you know, you know, pulling my arm to get me out of the door, I spent most weekends and evenings at home just watching TV and movies with my parents and making pizzas. Like, um, I was totally fine with that repetitive insular lifestyle. And I am still to a certain degree. Like I think it drives my wife crazy. Like, during the pandemic, I obviously miss, seeing friends and going out to the bar or whatever. But I can do the same thing every day. Like it's a thing that's in me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I wake up, I make some tea, I make some oatmeal, and, for lunch I have this and that, and then dinner, okay, I make this batch and I have that every day. And like, I watch one episode of a thing and I read my book and I go to bed. Like, I'm fine with it. And she's less so. Um, yeah. And I think that's just because, like, that's kind of what my childhood was like, is the repetition. There's something comfortable about that repetition.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm mostly an introvert. And
Yeah.
it takes me, I have to like really make an effort to call my friends and be
Yeah.
like, "Hey, we should go sit on the lawn with our masks on and talk for a while." And every
Yeah.
time I do, it's fantastic, and I keep getting reminded. I'm like, "Oh, right. I do like this camaraderie." And then I forget about it for like weeks on end.
Yeah. Yeah. I think most of us are kind of like that. Um, the older you get too, like I'm mid 40s now, and most of my friends are, married with kids. And some of those kids are like going into high school. Like it's amazing how fast that happens. But the older you get, the more you drift apart, sometimes just physically as well as emotionally. So, a couple of years ago, I realized that was a problem. And, I made an effort. Like I got all my guy friends together and I'm like, we're going to Montreal. Like, these are the train tickets. Let's just do this. And, we had a great time. And like, that was to become a yearly thing, but it was canceled this year for obvious reasons. Um, yeah, because I'm definitely an introvert who excels at being an extrovert
Yeah.
when called upon to do it. Like if you dump me at a comic convention, I can be on for the 10 to 12 hours of that show. Kissing babies, shaking hands. I'm doing panels and like just running into friends and being up and on. And then I go back to my hotel room and I sit and I stare at a wall, and I don't want to go back out. Like very rarely do I go to the hotel bar to like meet with people because I'm just like, that's it. I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it an energy thing?
Um, yeah, I don't know. Like energy breeds energy. Like that's part of it as well. That's a discussion I have a lot with my wife. Like, um, if you don't do anything, then an object in motion stays in motion. Object not in motion doesn't do shit. Like, I'll have days like that where I'm just like, if I don't start it up, then I don't get the energy to keep doing the thing. Um, yeah, so there's an adrenaline from it. Like there's no I've never had a bad day at a convention where I've been off because the adrenaline of it and like knowing that I have to do it, so I do it. I have these like long, amazing days, and yet when I'm here by myself and I've got to do a script, I'm just like, oh, and I'm just
Yeah.
like lying on the couch and maybe I'll have some potato chips or something, or I'll take a break and watch a YouTube video. Like, where's that energy? Like, why can't I tap into the Comic-Con energy?
Yeah, the social pressure of having of like, I mean, for me it'd be like a comedy show or something like that, or like when my wife and I do our podcast live. It's the pressure of people's eyes on you that make you. But like I would like here
Yeah.
are a bunch of notes. I'm writing a movie and I'm supposed to put the scenes on these index cards I'm showing you
Mm-hmm.
right here,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been. I finally 3 days ago got the index cards out of my drawer
Yep.
and put them right here next to the computer where
Huge
they.
step. It's a huge step.
Big step, and they've been sitting there.
Yeah.
And at some point, I will cut them in half.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Very important.
they'll sit there for a little while longer, and then eventually I'll write the scenes on them and put them on the corkboard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know that feeling all too well. It's kind of why I have so many projects. Um, and that's
Yeah.
again, to bring my wife back into it. It's a discussion I have with her a lot. Like, um, I overextend myself in terms of like projects, or at least I appear to. So like right now, I probably have 9 different books that I'm working on at various stages. And when I debate the 10th book, my wife's like, "What? You can't do that. You just work too much." I'm like, "Well, I don't. Like, I still work from like I work a 8 9 hour day,
Yeah.
and I make dinner. Like I do all the things I'm supposed to do. I don't pull all nighters. I haven't done that since college. Um, and I keep telling her like, if I have 9 books to do in a week, I'll do them. If I have 1 book to do in a week, I'll do it, and it'll take the same amount of time. Because if I have a week to do a book, I'm thinking about it a lot for day one and day two, and then I bring out the cards and like all the
Yep.
different things. It'll probably end up maybe a little bit better than the rush job that I might have to do on it, but I need the energy of having multiple books and the pressure of it too. Like the other thing is like in public school for me, I was a bad student in terms of doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
The tests I aced. I would always do really well on tests. I wouldn't hand in any projects. When it was a group project, that's when I stepped up because other people were relying on me. Like I would always take those over. And I think the same's true for me as an adult. With comics, like there's always somebody waiting. Like
Yeah.
an artist waiting, like I'll never leave an artist waiting. Like I know it happens. Like sometimes like you can't predict like a family member dies or there's been an accident and you can't get the script in on Monday. Okay. But man, like the amount of guilt I would have leaving an artist hanging who relies on that, like that's what drives me. And vice versa. Like got a little sloppier on sex criminals because it's just Matt and myself, and we would both let each other down deadline wise. But like once you start both doing that, it's kind of like a husband and wife who's just like, "What do you want to do for dinner tonight?" I don't know. Maybe pizza. And then both of you are all in on pizza. All it takes is the one person to be like we're not making dinner. The other person's not going to argue, let's make dinner. They're going to be like, oh yeah, let's go have pizza. Like
Yeah.
it's and that's what happens on a book like Sex Criminals. Where it's like if Matt's late on the script and then I start drawing it, chances are high I'm going to be late delivering that issue. If Matt hits the script deadline, I'll probably hit the art deadline on that because like the tone's been set. We have an agreement now. One of us said let's make dinner, so I'm like, all right, we're making dinner.
Oh gosh, this is resonating so much with me in that like the inertia. If no one is waiting on me,
Yeah.
the inertia, overcoming that inertia is really difficult. But if someone is waiting, like I come up from a like an improv and sketch background,
Mm-hmm.
and having to be accountable to other people and the guilt of dropping the ball.
Yeah.
That energy that I use that shame energy to
Yeah.
push past that inertia of not doing the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get it. Yeah, it's like I think about doing a project on my own now that I'm rap sex criminals, like write and draw. But I'm like, well, who am I letting down? And that becomes a mind fuck. I'm just like, can I get past that and like push myself to actually do it on my own? I've started tinkering with a novel, and it's obviously kind of the last thing on the list because I'm writing all these other books. But that's been really hard. Like just making sure, like I sit down, like once a day. Maybe I'll get a skip day, but put a few hundred words down and just let it be. That's been incredibly hard
Yeah.
because me 10 years ago wouldn't have been able to do that. And me now having like had enough of a career where I do hit all the deadlines, some of that is seeped into the old me a little bit, and I'm delivering that novel to myself somewhat on time.
Yeah, but it's just so interesting that like I'm just thinking about myself now in relation to this that the like the idea that a project fills up the time that you have allotted.
Hmm.
If I have a script due or something like that, and I know I'm like, yes, okay, I know that it's gonna be, I know it, I know, and it's got to be done Monday. I
Yeah.
know that, but if not, if there's no deadline, it just whatever it is expands into this like uh unwritten future
Yep.
until
Yeah.
someone's like, hey, where's that thing you said you would write for me?
Yeah. That's most creative people, I think. Yeah. I've had that talk with Matt too before, where like, there's one point in the last arc that, it's possible we're going to slip behind. And Matt was like, well, what if we, have this month as a skip month, um, and then, it buys us an extra month. I'm just like, but what are we going to do with that extra month? Like, we're actually like, if we keep to the schedule, we'll hit it on time. Like, I know that when the issues are solicited, when we have to get it out the door, we get it out the door. As soon as we say, oh, let's take 6 months off and work on it, like at the end of the 6 months, we have an issue done. Like, it just doesn't, like,
Yeah.
I know myself well enough now to know the situations where I'm not going to get a thing done.
Yeah, I that's why I asked though about like the is it an energy thing, because I think that I've always been a kind of not low energy but like medium energy person.
Yeah.
Like that's just like my natural state. Whatever my mitochondria are doing in my cells, they just like put out this like middle amount of energy, and so I only have so many. Like in a day, I have to allocate that energy into uh, different places, whatever chores or making dinner or whatever it is, and so
Yeah. I mean that's where list making comes in handy. That's where actually scheduling things comes in handy. And
mm-hmm.
then I do, yeah, you hold up your post-it note, like, and I do a lot of that. Like when I have a day planned, I'm just like from 9 till 10 I'm answering emails. From 10 to noon I'm working on this. From noon to 1 it's lunch. 4 to 5 will be prep for dinner. Like I'm or else I'll just be like, I'll just work on one thing and then it'll get slower at that thing, and then I'll like you kind of have to. There's all sorts of techniques. Like, I know friends that swear by like the Pomodoro technique or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
my wife does it sometimes.
yeah, and I don't subscribe to like following specific techniques. Like, you kind of got to create the stuff that works for you. But even with low energy or mid energy, how much energy does it take to take those post-it cards out of that desk? Like, not a lot.
Not a lot of
It doesn't.
psychic energy.
Yeah, that's the thing. Take it out. Okay, well, spread them out. Okay, start to, like, you just, everything's just steps, and that's the other thing. Like, that I've learned, and I find a lot of people have a lot of trouble with, is that everything is stages, and you just have to look at the stages. Like the project is too big. Drawing an issue of sex criminals is so much work.
Yeah.
It's an insane amount of work because I'm coloring it too and lettering. Like, it's to create that final issue is a full-time job, but it has to happen in stages, and you have to do the stages. So if you just focus on the stages, then it eventually happens. Like, I always liken it to like cleaning a room. Like, you see a room is filthy, it's just like, oh my God, like where to begin? Well, you begin by picking something up,
Mm-hmm.
and then every step of that process is a forward motion. Like, eventually that room's going to get cleaned. Like, as soon as you
Yeah.
start to put a thing away, but like the visual of the enormity of a thing overwhelms, and you just can't do it.
Yes. I think that's the thing. I think, at least
So
for me, that it's
yes,
that kind of like the enormity of the project stretching out into, especially like a movie. Now it's like stretching out into the what 2 years. This could be
yeah,
2 years of my life.
yeah,
Is I was gonna say daunting. It's not that. It's just like it makes me afraid. I think that's the energy.
yeah. I have a friend who, he's like a talented guy, and he's done some directing and stuff, and he really wants to write a movie, but he's been talking about it for a long time. I remember saying to him, uh, one weekend where I'm just like, well, just do it. Like there's no future where you will look back and go, I'm glad I waited 10 years to write it. It's just not a thing,
Yeah.
because, even if you write a bad version of it, you're going to learn a lot from that bad version. But like the longer you put it off, the bigger it is in your head and the more impossible it seems. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's all a mind fuck. And um, yeah, really just hitting things at their parts. Like an issue of Sex Criminals starts by reading the script and doing layouts. It takes me a day. And, okay, as long as I know that that's part of the process, I'll do this and it'll take a day. All right. After that, pencil and ink a page, that takes a day. Like, I have, for each issue, I would usually drop like a big checklist, just like, and mark things off every day. Like
Mm.
the act of marking a thing off feels like progress.
Yes. Yeah.
Like
Oh, I love
I
crossing off
love
a
that
thing on the
feeling.
list.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
I mean,
I highly recommend it. As is, and even for a script, like the outline, like, act one, act two, act three, like, okay, that's a thing you can check off a list.
mhm.
Character development, like, that's a thing you can check off. Like, yeah.
Did you like? Did these kind of good creative habits start when you were younger? Did you just develop them over time?
No, like I blew all deadlines, free deadline on everything, and like the comics I made for myself as a kid would, all fizzle out after 3 pages. Um, yeah, it was only when I really there were points when I was working at the newspaper, because I was in a newspaper for about 13 years. I started pitching them my own stuff, and then I kind of became a columnist and a humor writer for them and cartoonist. Um, so what drove me there was the teamwork between everyone in a department, and just making somebody laugh, or like,
Mm.
getting this funny, interesting thing out there. Um, so once I started working for the newspaper, I think because it's a daily deadline place, like you just can't blow a deadline, or else there's
Right.
a blank page in a newspaper. Um, that really taught me uh, better work habits. Just that kind of that unending schedule. Like there was an editor there who once told me that working at the newspaper and being the editor there in the section felt like being on an airplane that was fueled by coal, and you kept having to shovel coal into the engine or it will crash. That's editing a daily newspaper, because it never stops, because
Right.
it's every day. Like even on a comic, at least the plane lands every once in a while and then takes off, but the newspaper just never slows down. And working in that environment, taught me to not be precious about my words, which was a huge thing.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
That's.
I remember the first thing I wrote for them. Um, I was an information graphics artist, so pie charts and like stock charts and maps and things like that. And I pitched them the idea of doing a full page collection of humorous infographics about Thanksgiving. So like a literal pie chart, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, and so I wrote all these jokes and stuff, and I handed it into an editor, and the editor came back and was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "This joke is like 1,000 words long. Like you got like 100 words max to tell this joke," and he like started scratching things out. I'm like, "Oh, but like it's the cadence and my rhythm, and look at that beautiful bit of alliteration." He's like, "Who gives a shit if no one's going to read it? Like it's a newspaper. Like the guys are reading it like on the subway, like to get to work. Like they're just not going to. They see that wall of text, they're just going to flip the page." Um, and I was upset. I remember just being upset. And then the next day when I saw it in print, I was just like, "Oh fuck, he was right. He was 100% right." And that taught me again to not be precious, to distill things down to their essentials.
Oh
Um,
God.
which was a massive thing for comics. As soon as I started doing comics, it's like there's only so much space on a page, and you read comics, you know, there are writers who put way too many words on a page, and you just start to gloss over them at some point, or they drown out the art, and you can't do that in comics. So like those lessons from the newspaper, um, yeah, really stayed with me.
That is like I remember when I first started doing sketch, and my writing partner at the time and I, like there were these really baroque, like we were trying to, do you know Stella, like
Yeah.
David Wayne, and
Yep.
we were trying to do that, and also this like British Matt Berry had a sketch duo called Snuffbox,
Yep.
and they were just like, both of these two things were insane, and we were like, we like that. And so we were heightening from their insanity. It was just nonsense. It was pure nonsense.
Yeah.
Some of it holds up, most of it doesn't. But like they were these just strange Baroque sketches. And after one of them, this is like, again, early on, like the first year I was doing any of this stuff. And I was like, I thought, I'm like, oh, there was some weird reference to like Metroid in like, some sketch. And no one got it because it was a weird reference to Metroid.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, it'd be funny if we handed out a glossary or end notes when we did sketches. And then, like, I don't know, maybe like a couple years later when I had actually been doing this for a while, I was like, oh, the lesson wasn't I should try to, after the fact, get people to understand the references. Maybe I should be writing more concise, understandable sketches.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the first
well,
place.
glossary is a very funny idea.
To like what you get off stage and you walk around handing out a glossary. If you didn't get the references,
would you handle the glossary beforehand? Like,
no.
See, I think that would work. If you hand them a glossary and it's just like, these are things that are going to come up and you should know about them. Metroid. And so they're just waiting for, it's like Chekhov's Metroid. It's been introduced and it's going to go off at some point.
See, that, like, if that was the joke, that would be great.
Yeah.
I think that works as a, but in my mind at the time, because I was so, I had so little experience, was that, that if I gave it to them beforehand, they would be sitting there reading the glossary as opposed to watching the nonsense on stage, which no one could even connect to in the first place because it was pure nonsense.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter. I could have handed out anything beforehand. It wouldn't have mattered.
Oh man. Sounds like it's an amazing idea.
We're right at the end of the show, and I just, one thing I'm still curious about. When you moved, like, what was Coldwater like? How long were you living in Coldwater?
Coldwater, it was 3 years. It was grade 4 through 6, and it was a tiny town, mostly of farmers. Yeah.
What led you guys there?
Work. My dad got a job working for a small town telecommunications place. Like, it was kind of back in the day when there wasn't just like two phone companies. Like, communities would have their own phone companies. The interesting thing too is we were living in Barrie before that as well. So we were living there, and I was going to school in Barrie. And then Dad got this job. It was like a 20-minute drive away, but we moved to the small town. And I found out later we had to move to the small town because my dad's anxiety, he was having like panic attacks, and he wanted to be able to walk to work. Like, the drive was, he was worried he was going to like crash a car or something. And these are things like, I found that out like a couple of months ago. So we moved to the small town, but being the outsiders in a small town like that was really rough on my parents. As kids, you kind of adapt, and I found some friends and stuff. But I think my parents had a really tough time there, not being accepted by the town and the community.
Was it like a Wicker Man type situation?
No, but it's just like, no one ever moved to the town. Like, you were born there. Like, that's just how it was. So anyone that kind of came from out of town was immediately suspect. It's kind of, and I've called upon a lot of those memories for a book I'm doing for Skybound right now about a small town called Stillwater. Because there's a creepy level to it. I went back to it a few years ago just to see what it was like, and I think it's still like the same population. Literally nothing has changed in the town. It's really weird.
That's so strange. Like, to me, because I don't have very much experience with small towns, so in my mind, The only stuff that it's just like movies and TV, where they have like they distrust the outsiders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I just assumed that was just like fiction, that wasn't really that some like some someone in New York is like that must be what small town people are like. I'll write this into the script.
To even add another weird layer to it of seemingly fiction, I was in love with the mayor's daughter, who was in my class, Jill, and my dad was arch enemies with the mayor.
What?
Yeah, they hated each other because there was like a whole thing going on about selling the phone company to a slightly bigger phone company, but it was owned by the town itself. So all the residents actually owned a share of the phone company, and I don't know what the fight between them was, but it was bad enough that like it reverberated back to me as a kid, being in love with this classmate of mine who was the daughter of the mayor, and like the mayor's wife, like she was just this super hot older lady who just like drove around in like the coolest car, and like she was like her own side story. I'm just like, God, this town. Like there was a weird old man across the street who tried to punch my dad out one night because his phone wasn't working. Like it's just small towns are just weird.
It's like because you don't have because it feels like okay, two things. One, that there's more of a community in small towns. So
Yeah.
there's that whatever that energy is that is
Yeah.
missing, I think, in the larger cities. But like because you don't have so many eyes on you, it's the same thing as like why does Chicago produce so many like weird artists, whether it's musicians or comedians or whatever. It's because it's isolated in some sense, whereas like New York and LA has like an industry in it, and so the minute you start doing anything, you have eyes on you.
Yeah.
In Chicago, you can develop on your own. I wonder if there's some kind of like existential version of that in small towns, where because you don't have a lot of eyes on you, you can kind of develop whatever personality strikes
It's
you.
yeah, it's weird. You don't have a lot of eyes on you, but when the eyes are on you, they're really on you. Like it's an intense thing. Like, oh, yeah, I heard you threw up behind the supermarket yesterday. Like Ted told me, and like so and so told them. Like you actually can't get away with a lot in a small town. I don't know. This just reminded me too. The other layer was, so I was in love with the mayor's daughter, and my best friend Jason was also in love with her, but he discovered one weekend that they were cousins.
Come on.
He went to a family reunion and he found out they were like third cousins or something. So I was off for him.
But
Yeah.
but even though you didn't feel like I mean, you said you felt like you belonged. Like when you moved back to Barrie, you said that you felt like you were a hick, even though you were only there for a couple years.
Well, no, like, so yeah, I was in Barrie, which was kind of like, again, that big city to me. Then I moved to Coldwater, which was like Hicktown. And then I moved back to Barrie in grade 7. And that's where I spent the rest of my like life until I moved out. And it felt like the reverse when I got there. I felt like I was the hick moving to the big town. Like I didn't understand what style was, skateboarding was, like anything. I showed up for my first day of class in a floral print T-shirt with my hair just gelled and spiked because I thought that's what the kids were into, and they were not. They were
Do you
not.
think that was that were you like did you fit in Coldwater basically? Like do you think that like that move was like this kind of like very alienating move?
Oh, 100%. It took me a little bit to get used to Coldwater, but those are my friends, and being uprooted from that and moving to Barrie was the worst year of my life. 100%. I spent almost every lunch hour or recess in the bathroom in a stall crying. Like I would have to be picked up and
Mm.
taken home. Like I found it just horrible. Like because I don't know. I was just old enough to recognize that like I've 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 lost an entire path of my life. All those people who are my friends are going to go off and be whoever they're going to be, and I'm not going to have any contact with them, and I've got to start new as the tiniest kid in school,
Oh
in which
man.
everyone knows each other, right? Like
Yeah.
I went to a lot of schools when I was younger, but that was the move that really messed me up, I think, and made me shyer than I ever was. And the teachers really tried to like pull me out of it with drawing, creative writing, plays. Like they kind of drafted me into doing plays. And yeah, and then I don't think I quite got out of that hole until college or end of high school.
Yeah, that's a really rough realization to have as an adolescent.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
I didn't have a lot going for me, so I couldn't really like rise to the occasion because I was just like this pipsqueak, and there were bullies in the school, and I was just like, all right, this is what we do.
God, and then you were resigned to it.
Kinda, yeah.
Chip, thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, thanks for the hour of therapy. I appreciate it.
No, this was really great. I'm glad we could chat.
Yeah, same here.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye. Bye.